Tactical Team.
Hey there, this is Malorian, this is the Orc Tactical Team, and this is going to be another question from a viewer. This one's from William Scott, and this one's all about the magic phase, saying how do you handle your dice, whether you have little or a lot. And man, this could be a pretty big topic because there are so many different variations to this and so many variables that are placed as a big role in answering this question. But it is a very important one and one that I don't think I've ever talked about before, so let's just jump right into it. Like I said, there's a lot of variables, and let's talk about some of the biggest ones from the very beginning. I would say one of the biggest variables you're looking at is the difference between the wizard level. So if you're both the same, right, level 4 versus level 4, then you're on even ground. But if you get into these situations where you have a level 4 and they have a level 1, or maybe no magic at all because they killed their guy or they just didn't take anything, something like that, that can really change the way that you're going to be rolling your dice. Now, if you are ever in the situation where you are the level 1 person, and you're trying to get something off against the level 4 guy, well, you know what? You're going to have to roll pretty much just dices and bunches and just throw as much as you can. Because really, for every single time you throw a dice or try and cast a spell, he's going to have a 1 dice bonus. So clearly, if you try rolling multiple sets, well, that means that they're going to get extra dice for every one of those. So let's say if you were just to do this, break your dice into 3 different times. Well, it's like you just gave him a free 3 dispel dice. Whereas you just take everything, it's like, bam, 6 dice that spell. Well, you know what? Now it's just a 1 dice advantage over the whole thing. And, I mean, there is the whole thing to talk about. What are the odds of, you trying to get off a couple of spells, and it'd be better not just to stop 1. But again, that's just a different variable. But in general, if they beat you in what they get for their bonus to dispel as opposed to what you get to cast, you want to be throwing more dice. Now, if you're in the reverse situation and you have the level 4 and they have the level 1, well, then you're in dreamland, and you're just going to be throwing little casts all the time, knowing that for every single one, you're getting that extra dice, extra dice, extra dice. And by extra dice, I'm not talking like the old slan rumination. What I'm talking about is that when you roll a dice, the average is 3.5. Well, the difference between the casting of a 1 and a 4 is an extra 3. So you're basically automatically getting an average addition of a dice in there. So that's what I'm talking about there. Another one could be, well, what if you're up against somebody that gets a lot of Dispel Scroll type abilities? This could be something where, like the Lizardmen now have 2 different scrolls. If it's God help you if up against the Dwarves, and they can have unlimited scrolls, basically with their runes. What do you do there? Well, again, the main thing you want to do is throw small amounts of dice. Because you know what? If you just go in 6 dice a spell, they can just scroll it, and all right, let's move on to the next magic phase. And this can be really bad because, well, clearly you lost the magic phase, but what I find mostly in my games is that the magic phase is really only critical in the first 3 turns. Basically, you have your first turn where some people even have it on the first turn, so that one's even kind of maybe. But a lot of times you might be trying to go for a long bomb dwellers. You might be trying to do these things, and it's more of the longer stuff. Or, hey, if you're the one who went second, well then okay, in your first turn, you might be now close enough to actually get off more of your spells if it's range dependent, or you're buffing up your guys or something like this so they don't want to charge or whatever have you. On turn 2, this is where combat's going to happen, and so this is really important. This is why turn 2, turn 3, where usually those first main engagements are happening, this is where the magic is most critical. And, I mean, past this, turn 4, 5, 6, I found for the most part, hey, I mean, sometimes the game's over by turn 4. It's really dwindling down. And if nothing else, it seems like a lot of times these last few turns are just the cleanup stages. Sure, you can have a time where magic matters, but really it's at turn 2 or turn 3. Why am I really pushing this? Well, it's the whole idea where those scrolls mean so much in those first few turns. And with that, if you know your opponent has a scroll, you want to try and force that out the very first turn. Because like I said, that first turn is like kind of like iffy. Like, okay, at this point, we're far away from each other. Nothing's really dedicated. Sure, it's pretty damn awesome if you get off that dweller's first turn, but it's a lot more of a bigger deal if our units are just about to fight. There's no running away. It's like, all right, you just lost a bunch of your dudes. Now let's fight. So that's why I'd say that on the very first turn as well, if you're trying to draw out that scroll, take all your dice and bam, just throw them in one big cast because it's going to be really high. You should have more dice than your opponent. They don't want your big spell to go off. If you have a big spell, be it, Foot of Gork or something like that, and then hopefully try and draw it out of them. Now again, if you're maybe in the situation where you're going to be having the level 4, you might be able to attrition out their scroll, right? If you're running a level 4 with a Book of Hoeth, so you're getting really high castings, and they just really don't want these things to go off, then maybe you can draw out a Dispel Scroll that way. But then again, I mean, a lot of the stuff, if we're looking at that situation in the High Elf lore, are pretty not that important when you're just looking at the first turn. It's a lot bigger deal when you're up close. So maybe first turn, Conflagration of Doom, and you're just going to be throwing all your dice, and they'll say, screw that scroll. And that's fantastic because now that means on turn 2 and turn 3, that scroll is out of the picture, and now you can basically get through your stuff as you need it. Now, I guess the next thing we could be talking about is, he broke it down to saying little amounts of dice and lots of dice, but I think one of the things you should talk about is what is actually the worst number to actually roll. And I bet you a lot of people out there would say, like, double ones, that's horrendous. I hate it when I get double ones because then I just got the 2 dice to play with. Well, I'm telling you right now, that's not the worst dice to get. The worst combination to get is a 6 and a 1. And my reasons for this is, hey, if you roll a 6 and a 1, you're going to have 7 dice. They're going to have 6. And so you only have an advantage of 1 dice. And so it really is a lot more even. And at that point, if you have something go wrong whatsoever, if you try throwing, lots of dice at a spell, then they'll get to see what happens before they stop it. It could easily be low. If you try doing little ones, one might fail. And worse, another thing here is if you go on 6 dice a spell, well, now you have this 1 dice. It's like, well, what do I use this on, right? Try and do some silly signature spell thing that might have like a 50% chance of going off. So, I really find that's the worst one because they have the highest ratio of dispel dice to your power dice. As opposed to if you get double 1, I love getting double 1 dice sometimes because what that really means is that you can just pick a spell to go off. Sure, you can't get the bigger ones like Foot of Gork or stuff like that, but you know what? A lot of these other ones, if it's a casting of around 11 or less, well, on your level 4, that's an average casting. And meanwhile, with their 1d6, they're not dispelling nothing. There's no way that they can double 6 a spell, right? If you just get this off, it's like, okay, well, I rolled an 11, 6 plus your 4 is 10. Guess what? You have no way of dispelling this unless you burn a scroll or something like that. So that's a little tidbit just going to kind of throw out there. Now, another thing to talk about this tier 2 is probably the whole idea of 6 dicing a spell and the whole idea about whether you should be trying to draw out the spell dice first and then 6 dice or 6 dice and then try and throw something else after. And again, it's really kind of dependent on the situation, but for the most part, I find that it is best to roll the 2 little dice first. And the reason why I do that is because, hey, if I throw those 2 little dice first, they're thinking like, okay, well, I could throw some dice against this, but I might need all these to stop the big 6 dice I know that's coming, right? And I mean, like, worst case scenario, it could be a thing where you just didn't cast it and then they just automatically save it all for dispelling your big one anyway. But you know what? What I find that happens sometimes the other way is I just throw my 6 dice at a spell, I get Irresistible Force, like, hooray, I got this spell off. And I was like, oh, well, now I got like 2 dice and you got like 6. Okay, those are a waste because you just shut them down. Meanwhile, if I'd have thrown those first, then I'm really putting that question to them saying, hey, you don't know I'm going to roll for this big spell. I might get double 6. I might roll really bad. You don't know how many dice you need for that. So are you going to stop this little one? And this is where you can kind of like sneak those through. it's not so much of a thing of trying to take away dispel dice from them, because at the same time it's more of a thing of actually sneaking the spell through, because really if they want to save dice for the big spell they will. It's just a thing of trying to get this past the point before they know what's going to happen with all those other dice. Now I guess the next thing we'd be talking about here now would be talking about the whole idea of 6 dicing a spell, because there's some people that just refuse to do it. And the reason why they refuse to do it is just because they just don't want to miscast. Like, miscasts are crazy. I don't want this to happen. Well, you know what? Miscasts really aren't that bad. And that's something I found that, sure you had the game, or, oh no, I rolled double 6. And my guy sucked into the warp and it's really horrible. Or, maybe it is a situation where you have like the prophetess that's in the middle of all of your Bretonnian knights. And then you do the big explosion and everybody gets hurt. Or maybe it's just a thing where everybody in base to base with you, which it worked out to be the same thing in lance formation. And that's really bad as well. But, these things are actually pretty rare. And, if you're not in one of those situations where if you're not a prophetess inside the lance, if you're not the slan inside the temple guard, for the most part, if you are a shaman on the edge of a unit and you even get like the one where everyone in base to base, well, that means 3 models. If it's the small blast, that's not very many models. If it's the big blast, again, not that bad. As opposed to whatever spell you're trying to 6 dice off, like, whether it's going to be the Purple Sun or the Foot of Gork or whatever you're going to be trying to do. The only thing I actually find that can be really annoying is the loss of dice, which is, again, a reason why I really push for trying to do the small thing first to get out of the way, because it could be a thing, too, where it's not just a thing where you irresistible forced and now they have all their dispel dice to stop your 2. Well, it could be the miscast gets rid of those dice anyway, so you might as well get rid of them while you can. Now, another thing I guess we can be kind of looking at here too is the criticality of spells. And this can be another massive variant to the way you're going to be doing your magic phase. Because sometimes there's really just like one really good spell you want to get off. If your big thing is, hey, I already have Throne of Vines up, it's all about this Flesh to Stone, that's the big one anyway, there's that situation, and then there's the other situation. Let's say if you're running Laurel Light or Laurel Shadow, saying, there's lots of smaller ones I want to get off. Well, obviously then if you have a small water of dice and you need to get off the one good one, well, that's pretty simple. All the dice you have, whether it's 2, 3, 4, you just throw them at that spell, try and get it off, because that's your critical spell. Again, you could break it up. It's like, okay, I got 4 dice, I'll throw 2 at this and 2 at that. You know what? That one you threw 2 dice at, like we just said, it's not critical. It's not one of your good spells. The other one's the one that's more important. So just save all of it to make sure the thing's going to have the biggest effect is actually going to be going off. The other thing is, well, what if you have multiple good spells? Like if you're in a Lure of Shadow or something like that. Well, all of a sudden, if you're with the low amount of dice, well, okay, then you might want to break that up and throw it at 2 and 2, right? Because if you have 2 critical spells, well, chances are they're not going to stop both of them, so roll and roll. Except when it comes to the math. And that's a big thing, is to really look at the math behind what you're rolling on your dice there. Really remember, like I said, each dice you roll is going to be an average of 3.5. Another easy one to remember is that every 2 dice will be 7. So really look at it. It's amazing the times that people just kind of like throw dice and they don't look at the math behind it. They're just like, oh yeah, I need a 9 on this, I'll throw 2 dice. It's like, well, man, you're a level 1. Your average is 8. On average, you're going to fail this. Why don't you throw an extra dice just to actually have math on your side? So that can be another thing where, I just said if you have 2 critical spells, but you only have 4 dice, you could go 2 and 2. But if their casting values mean that you're only be casting them on average, or maybe not at all, well, then you're just going to be combining your dice and do it all at once. Because the worst thing you want to happen is maybe try and cast the first one and you fail and your magic phase is over. Or let's say you have 2 mages, so you roll the first one and you fail. So now all their dice is going to be trying stopping the second one, right? So that math is another big variant as to how many dice you're going to be throw all at these at the smaller level. Now, what if you have lots of dice, which is Lots of fun because you can do lots of crazy things. Well, again, if you're playing the whole thing where you have one big spell you need to get off, both you and your opponent know that it's all about whether you get Mind Razor off this turn. It's all about whether you get off Purple Sun or whatever this like massive game-changing spell. This is the one spell that matters. And hey, you have 12 dice. Well, one of the things I look at this time here is I talked about throwing some of the dice before because, hey, you could just double six it and it could be all over, right? It could be a thing where, you lose those dice, so make sure to throw them first. You know what? If this is the critical spell that needs to go off, roll those 6 dice first. And the reason why I'm saying that is because it could be a thing where it's like, okay, I got lots of dice. Oh, I really want this spell to go off, but hey, why don't I throw these 2 first just to try and draw out your dice, which is not going to happen unless they're a fool. And then it's like, oh, I just double sixed it. Oh, now my magic phase is over. Or I just lost 6 dice, and now I can't 6 dice the spell that's important. Ugh. I don't know how many times I've seen that. It's just like, this spell is important. I don't care how many dice you have. Just take those 6 dice and just kabam. Just throw them right in there because that's what's important. And you just don't want to take the chance. If you throw that 2 dice at some other spell, that you might fail to cast and lose concentration, or miscast and either lose a caster, lose power dice, and have the whole thing wrecked. Now, what about the other situation there where we're talking about something again like the Lore of Shadow where you have a lot of good spells? It's like, well, or the Lore of Life. These are all good. It's not like 2 things have to be going at the same time. If I get off any of these, it'll really help keep this battle. Well, again, this whole just changes to what's the math behind the dice. You could just say, if you got the perfect situation, you got 12 dice, you just go like 6 dice this one, 6 dice that one. But at the same time, you probably don't need to throw that many at it, especially at something like with these ones where you have 3 good spells or even 4 good spells. You can break those up and be throwing 3 at each or 4 at each, depending what the situation is, and most importantly, what the math is. Another big thing I got to be saying about the math here too, just to kind of really get this focus in, is let's say I need this spell. It's going to be this to cast. And I say, okay, if I take this plus my wizard level, that equals this. All right, that's the right number of dice. I am going to throw it. Oh, damn, it failed. And because that's the thing, is like if you get that even, all right, well, kind of like just barely over average, that means you're going to get it. Well, okay, what if you throw an extra dice with it? Then that percentage of actually making the value goes up. But always remember, there is that level, that percentage of failure. Because even if something has, it's going to work 80% of the time. Well, that means it's going to fail 20% of the time. So it could be that, if I have 7 dice, and if I say, okay, I know if I throw 5 dice at this, it's going to work 80% of the time, and then, hey, I got these 2 dice to throw at something else. I'd hate to throw 6 dice and have the 1 dice be useless, but then all of a sudden your plan hinges on this 20% of failure, and why not? If that's critical for you winning the game, 6 dice that, have your other spell be a flop, because like I said, that's the critical one, and you can be changing that 80% of success to 95, whatever the math is. I mean, of course, you have to really work it out for the situation, but you have to really take that risk into your mind with these numbers. And it's not just a thing where, okay, on average this will go off, or 75% of the time this will work. Really sit there and think, like, can I handle it, and will the game be over if I have that 25% where I don't get it? So I think that kind of covers most of the different situations here. I guess there's smaller cases, scenarios where you could be doing something different. I guess just to kind of pick one out here, what if you have some bound items, right? What if you're something where you have like some magic items which are bound spells, or if you have like warrior priests and stuff like that, where you can just like throw 1 dice at these spells and stuff like that. For these 1 dice things, I kind of like using them at the end. And the reason for that is because each one has a pretty low chance, usually it's like 50-50 or even like 1/3 chance or whatever it is for these things actually to work when you're one dicing them. And so the whole idea here is that sometimes I play against Empire players and I'm trying to wonder, like, okay, I got 5 dice, he's got 9, what am I going to do? What is he going to throw at me? And he's like, all right, I'm going to one dice this. Oh, it failed. Okay, and I'm going to one dice this. Oh, it failed. And also it's like, okay, now it's 5-7. This is a lot easier to handle. Whereas opposed to if you save those little bound things to the very end, where there's like these little no chances. Is this going to go off? Hey, am I going to be getting, whatever little re-rolls wherever you get from the warrior priest? All of a sudden I got to be wondering, like, man, do I got to save dice for that? Is it going to go off or not? Because these are little things where they're pretty minor, pretty easy to get off, and it might be not a dominating thing that changes like flush to stone, but hey, some of those warrior priest things can really make a big difference. So those ones, I would say save those to the end. Also because, like I said, they're not super critical. And if you were to say, like, okay, in my Empire army, I have my level 4 of life and I have these warrior priests. Malorian says roll these ones first because I might lose them. Well, in that case there where you're going to be 6 dicing a spell and they're going to be throwing everything to stop that, well, it's not going to be really changing any of the math. However, if it's a thing where you're not going to be 6 dicing a spell, save those little ones to the end because then they never know, like, should I be saving dice for that or not? Because, half the time it'll work, half the time it won't, and it really puts that question in their head. I think that really covers everything now. Like I said, there's so many different variants we're talking about here. I mean, like the old rumination things and stuff like that. And, now we got the Book of Hoeth where it makes you even stronger there. But for the most part, I think we've gone already 20 minutes for this Orc Tactical team. I think that pretty much covers it. So thanks for watching, and we'll catch you later. Bye.